The Emperor has billions of servants across 1,000,000 worlds. He cannot remember them all. I know this now, standing in shadows where his light does not reach. My name was Castellan Valdor Hestin of the Crimson Guard. I led 10,000 souls in his name. But when I needed him most, when we all did, he looked away. This is what it means to be forgotten by a god. This is the truth they hide behind incense and liturgy. We are not his children. We are simply too small to see. I believed once with the fervor of the newly converted, with the certainty of one who has never questioned, with the absolute conviction that comes from never having reason to doubt. The fortress monastery of the Crimson Guard rose from the granite cliffs of astral meridian like a prayer made stone, its towers reaching toward a sky we had sworn to protect in his name. For 3,000 years, my chapter had held this world, this border territory, far from the glory of the great crusades, but no less vital in our service to the God Emperor of mankind. My name was Castellan Valdor Hestin, though I had not been born with that name. That identity belonged to a child on a forgotten hive world, a boy who died the day the recruitment vessels descended. I became Valdor through pain and transformation, through the implantation of the gene seed and the breaking of everything weak within me. I rose through 3 centuries of service to command the Crimson Guard as its Castellan, bearing the weight of 1,000 battle brothers and the honor of our chapter's ancient legacy. We were not the Blood Angels with their artistic beauty and cursed nobility. We were not the Ultramarines with their rigid adherence to the Codex and their diplomatic weight. We were not the Space Wolves with their savage charisma and their famous deeds. We were the Crimson Guard, a successor chapter of uncertain lineage, defenders of a strategic but unglamorous corner of the Imperium where glory came rarely and recognition even less. But we served without complaint, without jealousy, without the pride that leads to ruin. We were faithful. That was enough. Each morning began the same way it had for 3 millennia. The great bells of the monastery rang out across the valley, their deep tones resonating through stone corridors and into the chambers where my brothers knelt in prayer. I would rise from the meditation slab that served as my bed, don my robes of office, and make my way to the chapter's sanctum, a vast cathedral carved from the mountain itself. The walls were lined with the names of the honored dead, thousands upon thousands of battle brothers who had given their lives in service to him. I would run my gauntleted hand across those inscriptions, feeling the weight of legacy, the burden of memory, the certainty that our sacrifices mattered to the master of mankind. The morning prayers were led by Brother Chaplain Mordrin, his skull-faced helm gleaming in the light of 1,000 candles. His voice would echo through the vaulted chamber as we knelt in perfect rows, our heads bowed, our hearts open to receive his blessing. The Emperor protects. Mordrin would intone, and we would respond as one. In life and death, we serve. The litany would continue for an hour, ancient words worn smooth by millennia of repetition, a linguistic armor against doubt and fear and the weakness of flesh. I felt him then. I truly did. In those moments of collective devotion, I felt a presence beyond the material, a warmth that seemed to emanate from Terra itself across the vast distance of space. It filled the hollow places inside, the parts of me that had been carved away to make room for duty and war and transhuman purpose. The Emperor watched over us. I knew this the way I knew my own heartbeat, the way I knew the weight of my bolter in my hands. It was not faith, it was certainty. After prayers came the morning briefings. I would ascend to the Strategium, a chamber dominated by a massive hololithic display showing our sector of space. Brother Captain Thalric, master of the fleet, would report on ship movements and patrol routes. Apothecary Calvin would detail the status of our gene seed stocks and the progress of new aspirants undergoing transformation. Techmarine Kiris would enumerate equipment status, ammunition reserves, the condition of our venerable dreadnoughts. Each report was precise, methodical, a testament to our efficiency and readiness. Astral Meridian itself was a world of harsh beauty. Granite mountains rose like the teeth of some buried titan, their peaks crowned with snow that never fully melted, even in summer. Forests of ironbark trees covered the valleys, their leaves a deep crimson that gave our chapter its name. The human population numbered only 3 million. Hardy settlers who farmed the valleys and mined the mountains, who knew that the Emperor's angels watched over them from the fortress above. They were good people, faithful people, who brought offerings of bread and salt to the monastery gates, and who raised their children to revere the Adeptus Astartes as the physical embodiment of the Emperor's protection. We defended 12 systems in our patrol sector. None were hive worlds with billions to protect. None were forge worlds producing the weapons of the Imperium's wars. None held strategic importance that would shift the balance of sector-wide campaigns. But each held human life, Imperial citizens living and working and praying in his name. And that made them worth defending. That made them sacred. 3 months before everything changed, we had repulsed an orc incursion on the mining world of Ferrum's Reach. It had been a minor threat, barely worthy of a full chapter deployment, but we had responded with overwhelming force. 50 battle brothers, led by Brother Captain Thalric, had descended in drop pods, their bolters singing the Emperor's judgment. The Greenskins were exterminated within 6 hours, their crude warband shattered before it could threaten the civilian population. Not a single miner had died. Not a single Imperial structure had been damaged beyond repair. When Thalric returned, we held a ceremony of thanksgiving in the Great Chapel. The rescued miners had sent a delegation. Ordinary men and women who knelt before us with tears streaming down their faces, thanking us for their lives, thanking the Emperor for sending his angels. I remember looking at those faces, seeing their genuine faith, their absolute belief that we had been guided by divine will to save them. It reinforced everything I knew to be true. The Emperor watched over the faithful. The Emperor provided. The Emperor protected. I had spoken to him that night in my private chambers, a small room whose only decoration was a simple aquila carved into the stone wall. I knelt before that symbol, my transhuman form folded in supplication, and I prayed, as I had prayed for 3 centuries. "My Lord and Master," I said into the silence, "thank you for allowing us to be your instruments. Thank you for the honor of bearing your gene seed. Thank you for every day of service, every enemy slain in your name, every life preserved through your grace. We are nothing without you. We exist only to serve. In life and in death, we are yours." The silence that followed felt holy. I imagined Terra, that distant throne world where he sat in eternal vigil, sustaining the Astronomicon that allowed humanity to traverse the warp. I imagined him seeing me, this faithful servant in a distant corner of his realm, acknowledging my devotion with some cosmic nod of approval. The thought filled me with purpose, with meaning, with the certainty that my existence mattered to the master of mankind. Brother Sergeant Davian once asked me, during a quiet moment on watch, whether I ever doubted. We stood on the fortress walls, looking out over the valley, the stars sharp and bright in the thin mountain air. "Do you ever wonder," he said carefully, "if he truly sees us, if he knows our names, our deeds, our sacrifices?" I had looked at him with genuine confusion. "How could I doubt the sun's existence?" I replied. "How could I question gravity or the passage of time? The Emperor's presence is as real as the stone beneath our feet. We feel him in every victory. In every moment we are preserved from death that should have claimed us. Faith is not hoping he exists, brother. Faith is knowing he does. Absolutely and completely. Faith." Davian had nodded, satisfied with my answer, and we spoke no more of it. But I remember that conversation now with bitter clarity. I remember the ease with which I dismissed his question, the arrogance of my certainty, the blindness of one who has never truly looked into the void. and seen it look back. Our chapter's history was written in blood and devotion. We traced our lineage to the second founding, though records were unclear about which first founding chapter had provided our gene seed. Some said we bore the bloodline of the Imperial Fists. Others claimed descent from the Raven Guard. We knew only that we were his sons, and that was identity enough. For 3,000 years we had fought in his name, against orcs and Eldar, against the corrupted servants of chaos, against Tyranid splinter fleets and dark Eldar raiders. We had lost, brothers, certainly. War demands its price, but we had never wavered, never broken, never questioned the purpose for which we bled. The chapter maintained a wall of remembrance in the eastern wing of the monastery, a vast corridor where every battle brother who had fallen in service was commemorated. Their names were inscribed in High Gothic, along with the manner and place of their death. I would walk that corridor sometimes, reading those names aloud, ensuring they were not forgotten. Brother Sergeant Matthias fell at the Battle of Corvin's Deep, defending civilians from dark Eldar raiders. Battle Brother Lucian gave his life holding the gate at Mercy's Fall, allowing 300 citizens to escape Xeno's onslaught. Each name represented a life given for humanity, for the Imperium, for the Emperor. How proud we were, how certain of our purpose, how completely we believed that he knew each name as well as we did, that he mourned each loss, that he valued each sacrifice in the great calculation of humanity's survival. We were his warriors, and that distinction made all the difference. Looking back now, I see a kind of innocence in that faith. Not the innocence of children, but the innocence of those who have never had their foundational truths challenged, who have never been forced to question the architecture of their reality. We believed because belief had never failed us, because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate, because without that faith we would have to confront what we truly were: created weapons, gene-forged killers, tools given the illusion of purpose. But I did not know that then. Then, I was simply faithful. Then, I was Castellan Valdor Hestin of the Crimson Guard, servant of the God Emperor, and I knew with absolute certainty that he watched over us all. The astropathic message arrived during evening prayers, shattering the liturgy like a stone through stained glass. I was kneeling in the sanctum with my brothers, our voices united in the hymn of the vigilant, when the doors burst open and epistolary Varan staggered through, his robes singed, his hands trembling. The choirmaster of our astropathic choir, an ancient psyker whose eyes had burned away decades ago in service to the Emperor, stood swaying like a tree in a storm wind. Blood ran from his nose, from his ears, from the empty sockets where his eyes had been. Castellan, he gasped, and his voice carried harmonics that spoke of the warp's touch, of messages screaming across the immaterium. Sanctums fall. The world burns. They beg for deliverance. Brother Chaplain Mordrin caught him as he collapsed, but I was already moving, my devotions abandoned, my mind shifting from prayer to war in the space between heartbeats. This was what we existed for. This was the Emperor's call made manifest. I reached the strategium within minutes. Varan carried between two battle brothers, and watched as the hololithic display resolved into a nightmare of tactical information. Sanctums fall. A hive world 3 systems distant, 17 billion souls packed into towering cities that scraped the clouds. A critical forge world complex on its southern continent, producing lasguns and armor for the sector's Imperial Guard regiments. A strategic anchor in the subsector's defensive network. And now, according to the fragmented astropathic messages still streaming through the warp, it was dying. Word-bearers, Varan whispered, his consciousness still partially aligned with the messages he had received. Thousands of them. A full warband, led by a dark apostle. They have been there for weeks, raising temples to their false gods, sacrificing the population to summon demons. The planetary governor is dead. The PDF forces are shattered. The hive cities burn with warp fire. I felt my hands clench into fists, ceramite grinding against ceramite. Word bearers. Traitor Astartes, who had turned from the Emperor during the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago, who had embraced the Chaos Gods and spent millennia spreading corruption across the galaxy. They were everything we despised, everything we had sworn to destroy. That they could operate freely for weeks on an imperial world spoke of catastrophic failure somewhere in the sector's defensive coordination. How many messages have they sent? I asked, already knowing I would not like the answer. Dozens, Castellan, replied Brother Captain Thalric, his augmetic eye glowing as he reviewed the tactical data. The first distress call went out 37 days ago. They have been transmitting continuously since then, requesting aid from any Imperial forces within range. Astropathic distress signals, emergency beacon activation, direct pleas to Sector Command. 37 days. More than a month of screaming into the void while 17 billion human souls suffered and died. The scale of it threatened to overwhelm my capacity for rage. How had no one responded? Where were the Imperial Navy battle groups that should have been patrolling this region? Where were the other chapters? Where were the Astra Militarum regiments that could have been deployed in force? What response did they receive? I asked, though the answer was already written in the silence that followed my question. None, Castellan, Thalric said quietly. According to their transmission logs, they sent requests to 14 separate Imperial authorities. Subsector Fleet Command, 3 different Space Marine chapters whose territories border this region, the Astra Militarum staging post at Connor's Gate, even direct pleas to the Segmentum Fortress. Nothing. No acknowledgement. No promises of aid. Just silence. The word hung in the air like a curse. Silence. 17 billion souls begging for help and receiving only silence in return. I thought of the miners on Ferrum's Reach, their tears of gratitude when we had arrived to save them from a few hundred orcs. What must the people of Sanctum's Fall feel, knowing that no salvation was coming? What prayers must they have screamed toward the heavens, expecting the Emperor's angels to descend and finding only empty sky? Mobilize the chapter, I commanded, and my voice cut through the strategium like a blade. Every battle brother who can hold a bolter. We deploy within 6 hours. Full combat load, maximum ammunition reserves. This is not a patrol action. This is a war. My officers moved immediately, voxing orders throughout the fortress monastery. 3 centuries of shared service meant no words were wasted. They knew what I required, knew what this mission demanded. Within minutes, the monastery transformed from a place of prayer to a hive of organized violence. Tech Marines blessed weapons and prepared armor. Apothecaries checked gene seed reserves and loaded their Nartheciums with emergency supplies. Chapter serfs scrambled to load drop pods and Thunderhawk gunships with ammunition crates and Prometheum reserves. I made my way to the armory, where my personal suit of artificer armor waited in its alcove. The armor was old, dating back nearly 3,000 years, passed down from Castellan to Castellan since the chapter's founding. Its crimson ceramite was inscribed with devotional script, every plate bearing prayers and oaths. As the artificers helped me don the sacred armor, I recited the litany of warding, asking for the Emperor's protection in the coming battle. My Lord and Master, I prayed as the armor systems came online, grant us the strength to be your instruments of deliverance. Guide our bolts to the hearts of traitors. Steel our resolve against the corruption of chaos. Let us be worthy of bearing your gene seed into battle. In life and in death, we serve only you. The words felt powerful, real, filled with the certainty that he heard and would answer. I believed then that we were doing his will, that our response to this distress call was part of some divine plan. The Emperor had allowed Sanctum's fall to suffer so that we might prove our faith through action, so that we might demonstrate the worth of the Crimson Guard to his greater design. We would be his answer to their prayers. We would be the deliverance they had begged for. Brother Chaplain Mordrin found me as I was loading my bolt pistol, the ancient weapon that had served 7 Castellans before me. His skull-faced helm was already sealed, his black armor adorned with purity seals and sacred texts. In one hand, he carried his Crozius Arcanum, the weapon and symbol of his office, crackling with disruption field energy. "The brothers are prepared, Castellan," he reported. "We muster 1,043 battle brothers for deployment. The venerable dreadnoughts Brother Ancient Marcus and Brother Ancient Theron have requested permission to join the assault." "Granted," I said without hesitation. Our dreadnoughts were heroes from ages past, battle brothers so grievously wounded that they had been interred in walking sarcophagi to continue their service. Their experience and firepower would be invaluable against traitor Astartes. "What is the estimated travel time to Sanctum's Fall?" "Between 4 and 7 days, depending on warp conditions," Thalric interjected, joining us in the armory. "The navigators report unusual turbulence in that region, but nothing that should prevent our passage. We can deploy the entire chapter using our 3 strike cruisers and supporting vessels." I nodded, running through tactical calculations in my enhanced mind. 7 days maximum. Sanctum's Fall had been suffering for over a month already. 7 more days might mean millions more dead, but we would be coming. We would bring the Emperor's wrath down upon the traitors. We would purge the word-bearers from that world and restore it to the light of the Imperium. This was our purpose. This was why we existed. The chapter assembled in the embarkation halls. 1,043 transhuman warriors in crimson armor, each a weapon forged through pain and genetic manipulation, each absolutely devoted to the Emperor's service. I stood before them on the raised dais, looking out at the assembled might of the Crimson Guard, and felt a fierce pride at what we were about to do. "Brothers," I called out, my voice amplified by the armor's Vox systems, "we go to war against the enemies of mankind. The word-bearers have descended upon Sanctum's Fall like locusts, corrupting and destroying in the name of their false gods. 17 billion Imperial citizens cry out for deliverance. For 37 days, their pleas have gone unanswered. No more. We are the Emperor's answer. We are his wrath made manifest. We will purge the traitors from that world, or die in the attempt. In life and in death, we serve only him." "In life and in death," they roared back, 1,000 voices speaking as one, and the sound echoed through the halls like thunder. We boarded the strike cruisers with practiced efficiency. The Crimson Dawn, flagship of our fleet, would carry 6 companies. The Vigilant Sword and Emperor's Justice would bear the remaining forces. Within 3 hours of receiving the distress call, we translated into the warp, our Geller fields holding back the horrors of the Immaterium as we raced towards Sanctum's Fall. The journey was difficult from the beginning. The warp storms that had been reported as minor turbulence proved far more severe than expected. Our navigators struggled to maintain course, their third eyes bleeding from the strain of perceiving the Emperor's light through the roiling chaos. Days stretched longer than they should have, the warp's distortion of time adding hours to our passage. I spent those days in prayer and preparation. Each morning I would gather with my brothers in the strike cruiser's chapel, leading them in the rituals of devotion that had sustained our chapter for millennia. Each evening I would review tactical data, planning our assault, considering every possible deployment strategy. We would make planetfall in force, establish a secure perimeter around any surviving Imperial strongholds, then systematically hunt down and destroy every traitor we could find. But beneath the planning and prayer, a small voice of doubt had begun to whisper. Why had no one else responded? Even if other chapters were engaged in campaigns elsewhere, even if the Imperial Navy had been redeployed, surely someone should have acknowledged Sanctum's Fall's distress calls. Surely someone should have sent even a token force, a promise that help was coming. The silence troubled me in ways I could not fully articulate. I mentioned this to Thalric during a tactical briefing on the 4th day of our journey. We stood alone in his strategic planning chamber, reviewing hololithic projections of Sanctum's Fall's hive cities. "It concerns me as well," he admitted, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on the data. The silence suggests either catastrophic communication failure across the entire sector or deliberate prioritization of resources elsewhere. Neither possibility reflects well on our command structure. Deliberate prioritization, I repeated, tasting the words. "You mean they chose not to respond?" "It is possible," Thalric said carefully. "If larger threats demanded attention elsewhere, if the strategic calculus determined that Sanctum's Fall could not be saved with available forces, then Command might have made the decision to abandon the world and focus resources on more defensible positions." The thought was obscene. Abandon 17 billion souls. Write off an entire world without even attempting rescue. I wanted to reject the possibility outright. But Thalric was my most experienced captain, a veteran of 2 centuries who had served in the Death Watch and seen the Imperium's strategic realities firsthand. If he thought it possible, I could not simply dismiss it. "The Emperor would not allow such abandonment," I said, needing to believe it. "He protects the faithful. These people have done nothing to deserve being cast aside." Thalric said nothing, but something in his silence felt like disagreement. On the 6th day, we emerged from the warp at the system's edge. What we found confirmed my worst fears and exceeded them. The system was a graveyard. Debris fields stretched across orbital space. The shattered remains of Imperial Navy vessels, defense monitors, and civilian transports. Sanctum's Fall itself was visible even at this distance, vast smoke plumes rising from burning hive cities, the night side of the planet lit by fires that consumed entire continents. "Emperor, preserve us," Mordrin whispered, his voice carrying shock that his training should have suppressed. The astropathic choir immediately began attempting contact with any surviving Imperial forces on the surface. The responses were fragmented, desperate, transmitted from isolated pockets of resistance, PDF remnants holding a fortified district, surviving guard regiments trapped in the underhive, civilian populations hiding in temple complexes, praying for salvation that had not come, and everywhere, the taint of chaos. Warp signatures bloomed across the planet's surface, marking the locations of demonic incursions. The word-bearers had been thorough in their corruption, raising 8 massive temples to the dark gods across the major continents. From these focal points, warp energy bled into real space, sustaining hordes of demons and empowering the traitor forces. "How long?" I asked Varen, though I already knew the answer would destroy me. "How long have they been like this?" The epistolary's burned sockets turned toward me, tears of blood streaming down his withered cheeks. "The first temple was consecrated 28 days ago, Castellan. The planet has been under full demonic assault for 4 weeks. 4 weeks. An entire month during which we had been blissfully unaware, during which Sanctum's Fall had screamed for help that never came, during which the word-bearers had operated unopposed to corrupt an entire world. If even one chapter had responded immediately, if even one Navy battle group had been dispatched, the temples might have been destroyed before they could fully manifest their abominations. But no one had come. Only us, arriving now when the corruption had already spread like cancer through the planetary body. "Prepare for immediate assault," I commanded, pushing aside the horror and focusing on what could still be done. "All companies will deploy simultaneously. Target priority is the destruction of those temples and the elimination of traitor Astartes' forces. Every soul we save matters. Every traitor we kill weakens the enemy. We may be late, but we are here, now. Let that be enough." As the strike cruisers moved into assault orbit and the drop pods were loaded, I knelt one final time before the small shrine in my personal chambers. The Aquila carved into the wall seemed to judge me, its twin-headed gaze asking why I had not come sooner. why I had not known, why I had failed these people. "Forgive me, my lord," I prayed, "for not arriving when they first called. But I am here now. I am your instrument. Guide my hand in the purging to come. Let me be worthy of your gene seed. Let me save who can still be saved." The silence that answered felt different than before. Less holy, more empty. But I attributed it to my own guilt, my own shame at arriving so late. I did not yet understand that the silence was honest, that it had always been silence, that prayers spoken into the void receive only void in return. We descended towards Sanctum's fall like crimson meteors, 1,000 Astartes drop pods screaming through the atmosphere toward a world that had been begging for us to arrive for 37 days. We came with righteous fury and absolute faith, believing we were the Emperor's answer to the faithful's prayers. We were wrong about so many things. The drop pod's retro thrusters screamed as we slammed into the surface of Sanctum's fall, the impact jarring even through my armor's shock absorption systems. The assault ramp blew outward in a spray of explosive bolts, and I stepped into hell itself. The sky above burned with unnatural colors, green and purple flames licking across clouds that should not exist in nature. The air tasted of ash and something worse, something that made even my enhanced biology recoil. Corruption, the fundamental wrongness of chaos, made manifest. We had deployed into what remained of Hive Primus, the planetary capital, its towering spires now broken stumps leaking smoke and screams. The plaza where my pod had landed was carpeted with bodies, civilians caught in whatever horror had overtaken this district. I forced myself to look at them, to bear witness to what our delayed arrival had cost. Men, women, children, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and agony. Some bore the marks of conventional weapons. Others showed signs of something far worse. Bodies twisted by warp energies, flesh remade into obscene sculptures. "Form defensive perimeter," I voxed to my command squad as they emerged from their own pods. "Sweep for survivors and establish firing positions. The enemy will respond to our arrival quickly." They moved with perfect discipline, my brothers spreading out across the plaza, bolters raised, scanning for threats through their helmet optics. Brother Sergeant Davian took position on my right, his power sword crackling with energy. Brother Champion Arcturus anchored my left, his storm shield mag-locked to his arm, his thunderhammer trailing arcs of electricity. This was what we had trained for across centuries. This was the Emperor's work, the Vox channels filled with reports from other elements of our deployment. Brother Captain Thalric had established a foothold in the industrial sector, already engaging cultist forces. Fourth Company reported heavy resistance near the planetary governor's palace, now transformed into a blasphemous shrine. Sixth Company had landed near one of the corrupted temples and was pushing toward it under concentrated fire. Everywhere, the Crimson Guard had arrived in force, and everywhere we met an enemy that had grown fat and confident from weeks of unopposed operation. Movement caught my eye. A group of civilians emerging from a collapsed hab block, perhaps 24 souls, their clothes torn, their faces gaunt with starvation and horror. When they saw us, saw our crimson armor and the Imperial Aquila on our chests, something broke in them. They ran toward us, stumbling over rubble, weeping, crying out in voices hoarse from screaming. "The Emperor's angels," one woman sobbed, falling to her knees before me. "You came. You finally came. We prayed. We prayed every day. We knew you would come." The words struck me like physical blows. Finally, every day. The weight of their suffering, their abandoned prayers, their faith that had sustained them through a month of nightmares. I reached down and lifted the woman to her feet, as gently as my armored gauntlets would allow. "You are safe now," I told her. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. "The Crimson Guard is here. We will protect you. On my honor, on the Emperor's name, we will not abandon you." I detailed 2 brothers to escort the civilians to our designated safe zone, a fortified cathedral 3 kilometers distant where we planned to consolidate any survivors we found. As they moved away, the woman looked back at me, and in her eyes I saw something that would haunt me. Not just gratitude, but a question. Why did it take so long? Where were you when the screaming started? The questions she was too polite or too grateful to voice aloud. The first engagement came within minutes. Cultists swarmed from the surrounding ruins, thousands of them. Ordinary humans driven mad by the word-bearers' preaching and the touch of the warp. They charged with crude weapons and twisted faith, screaming prayers to dark gods, and we cut them down with bolter fire that thundered across the plaza. Mass reactive rounds found flesh and detonated, turning human bodies into red mist. It was butchery, necessary and brutal, the price of their corruption. But even as they fell, more came. And behind them, moving with transhuman grace and purpose, the real enemy revealed themselves. Word-bearers. Their crimson armor adorned with blasphemous scripture, the 8-pointed star of chaos prominent on their chest plates. Traitor Astartes, once brothers like us, now pledged to powers that sought humanity's annihilation. Heretics, Brother Chaplain Mordrin roared, his Crozius Arcanum raised high. Children of Lorgar who betrayed the Emperor's trust. Face his judgment. They answered with bolter fire and the harsh laughter of those who have abandoned all restraint. The battle joined in earnest, Astartes against Astartes, the plaza becoming a killing ground where every second meant a life ended. I fired my bolt pistol with mechanical precision, each round finding a gap in traitor armor, each detonation a small victory. My power fist crackled as I closed with a word-bearer champion, our weapons meeting in a shower of sparks and disruption field energy. He was skilled, this traitor. His techniques refined over 10,000 years of war. But I fought with faith, with righteous fury, with the certainty that the Emperor guided my hand. My fist found his helm and crushed it, ceramite and bone yielding to blessed technology. He fell, and I felt no mercy, only satisfaction that one more betrayer had met his end. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, we held the plaza and the surrounding blocks, a toehold in the hive city bought with the blood of the corrupt. But the cost troubled me. We had lost 7 battle brothers, killed by traitor bolts or torn apart by demonic entities that manifested when their summoners completed blasphemous chants. 7 brothers who would never return to Astral Meridian, whose gene seed Apothecary Calvin harvested with reverent efficiency for future implantation. I established my command post in a partially intact administratum building, its walls still bearing Imperial propaganda posters now faded and torn. As Techmarine Kiris set up communications equipment, I reviewed tactical data flowing in from across the hive. The picture it painted was grim beyond measure. The word-bearers numbered in the thousands, a full warband that must have been gathering in this region for years before they struck. They had brought mortal auxiliaries by the tens of thousands, cultists and traitor guard units. And the daemons, entities of the warp given temporary flesh through sacrifice and ritual, prowled the ruins in numbers that defied easy counting. We were outnumbered perhaps 50 to 1, maybe more, and those were only the enemies we could actively detect. Castellan, Thalric's voice crackled over the command vox. 4th Company has secured the Cathedral District and consolidated 2,000 civilian survivors. But we've discovered something you need to see. Bodies. Thousands of them. Arranged in ritual patterns. What kind of patterns? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Summoning circles, Castellan. They've been sacrificing the population systematically to fuel their warp rituals. Based on the decomposition rates and the number of bodies, I estimate they've murdered between 2 and 3 million civilians in the past month alone. 2 to 3 million. The number was so vast it became abstract, impossible to truly comprehend. I thought of the woman who had knelt before me, thanking me for coming, thanking the Emperor for sending his angels. What had she witnessed in the weeks before we arrived? How many friends, how many family members had she watched die while she prayed for rescue that came too late? "Continue fortifying the cathedral," I ordered, pushing emotion aside. "We hold what we can. We save who we can. That has to be enough." But was it enough? The question gnawed at me as I coordinated our defense across the following days. We fought constantly, endless running battles through hive corridors and rubble-choked streets. We saved civilians where we found them, evacuating survivors to our defensive perimeter. We killed cultists by the hundreds, traitors by the dozens. We even managed to destroy one of the corrupted temples, Brother Ancient Marcus's assault cannon, reducing the blasphemous structure to rubble while its daemon guardian was banished, screaming back to the warp. Yet for every victory, we suffered losses. Brother Sergeant Gaius fell defending a group of children, his armor breached by a chaos-corrupted power weapon. Battle Brother Lucan died holding a choke point so that civilians could escape, buried under a tide of cultists. Brother Ancient Theron's dreadnought sarcophagus was breached by sustained las cannon fire. His ancient remains finally granted true death after centuries of service. Each loss diminished us. Each death meant one less warrior to hold the line. And all the while, we waited for reinforcements that did not come. I had Epistolary Varon transmit distress calls continuously, updates on our situation, pleas for any Imperial forces within range to assist. The messages went out into the warp, carried by the psychic choir's combined power, seeking any friendly ears that might hear. Surely other chapters monitored astropathic channels. Surely the sector fleet tracked major engagements. Surely someone would recognize that 1,000 Astartes fighting a desperate defense on a corrupted hive world merited support. Days became a week became 2. The Vox remained silent except for the reports of my own brothers, the situation updates from company captains, the casualty lists that grew longer each day. No Imperial Navy, no other chapters, no guard regiments, just us, alone, fighting a war we could not win. Brother Captain Thalric came to me on the 14th day, his armor scored by a dozen near hits, his augmetic eye flickering with damage he had not yet found time to repair. We stood on the cathedral's walls, looking out at the hive city burning under a sky that had forgotten what clean sunlight looked like. "Castellan," he said quietly, "we need to discuss extraction." "Extraction," I repeated, the word foreign to my tongue. "We still hold our positions. We still have civilians under our protection. We still have a mission to complete. We have lost 432 battle brothers," Thalric replied, and his voice carried the weight of every one of those deaths. "Nearly half our chapter is gone. We cannot destroy the remaining temples with our current strength. We cannot hold this perimeter indefinitely against an enemy that grows stronger each day. And no one is coming to help us." The last sentence hung between us, heavy with implications I was not ready to face. I said, "Reinforcements may be days away. If we abandon this position now, the civilians will die. Everyone we have saved will have been saved for nothing. If we stay here, the chapter dies," Thalric said flatly. "And then the civilians die anyway, just a few days later. Sometimes, Castellan, the only choice is between falling back to fight another day or dying to make a point that no one is watching you make." I wanted to strike him, to rage against his cold logic, his willingness to even consider abandonment. But he was right, and we both knew it. The tactical reality was undeniable. We could not win this engagement. We could only choose how completely we wished to lose. "Maybe no one is coming," I whispered, voicing the thought that had grown like cancer in my mind for 2 weeks. "Maybe we were always alone here." Thalric said nothing, which was answer enough. That night, I knelt in the cathedral's sanctuary, surrounded by imperial iconography that now felt hollow. Frescoes showing the emperor in glory, leading his armies during the Great Crusade. Statues of saints, their stone faces serene with faith. And everywhere, the Aquila, that two-headed eagle that symbolized his eternal vigilance over humanity. "My Lord," I prayed, and my voice cracked with exhaustion and something deeper. "I do not understand. We came when they called. We have fought with every ounce of strength you gave us. We have saved thousands. But it is not enough. It was never going to be enough. Where are the reinforcements? Where is your support? These people have faith in you. They believe. You sent us. But if you sent us, why did you send us alone? Why did you wait so long? Why?" I could not finish the question, could not voice the doubt that clawed at my throat. The silence in the cathedral felt oppressive, accusatory, empty of the presence I had always believed filled such holy spaces. I knelt there for hours, waiting for some sign, some reassurance, some indication that our sacrifice mattered to the master of mankind. Nothing came, just silence, and the distant sounds of battle, and the knowledge that tomorrow we would fight again, and more brothers would die, and still no help would arrive. On the morning of the 16th day, as I prepared for another desperate defense, Brother Sergeant Davian approached me in the armory, where I was blessing my weapons. His helm was removed, revealing a face younger than mine, earnest and troubled. "Castellan," he said, "the men need to hear from you. They need to know that this sacrifice has meaning, that the Emperor sees what we do here." I looked at him, at his faithful eyes, at the certainty in his bearing that had not yet been eroded by the weight of unanswered prayers. "What do you want me to tell them, Davian?" "Tell them what you have always told us, that the Emperor protects, that we are his instruments, that our faith is rewarded even in death. And if I do not know those things to be true anymore?" The words escaped before I could stop them. Heresy spoken aloud in the quiet of the armory. Davian recoiled as if I had struck him. "Castellan, you cannot mean that. You cannot doubt. You are the rock upon which this chapter stands. If you waver, we all fall." He was right, of course. My doubt was a poison that would infect my brothers, undermining the very faith that kept them fighting against impossible odds. So I swallowed the questions, buried the anger, and nodded. "You are right, brother. Forgive me." I gathered them in the cathedral. Those who remained, 608 battle brothers, who had survived 2 weeks of constant warfare. I looked out at their assembled might, so much less than what we had brought to this world, and I lied to them with every word. "Brothers of the Crimson God," I said, my voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast space. "We have fought with honor and courage that would make our Primarch proud. We have saved thousands who would otherwise have perished. We have slain traitors and daemons in numbers that will echo through the warp. We are the Emperor's answer to the faithful's prayers. We are his wrath and his mercy. Whether reinforcements come or not, whether we stand here or fall here, we do so knowing we have served him perfectly. In life and in death, we serve only the God Emperor of mankind." "In life and in death," they roared back, and I heard in their voices the faith I no longer felt, the certainty I could no longer share. That afternoon, the word-bearers launched their largest assault yet. Thousands of cultists, supported by dozens of traitor Astartes, backed by demon engines and warp-spawned horrors. They came in a tide that threatened to overwhelm our positions through sheer weight of numbers. We met them with bolter, fire and blade, with plasma and melta, with every weapon we possessed. The battle raged for 6 hours, the cathedral's walls running red with blood, both human and transhuman. When it ended, we still held. But we had lost another 80 brothers, including Brother Chaplain Mordrin, killed when a Chaos Dreadnought's power claw tore through his armor and crushed the life from him. I held his broken body afterward. This warrior who had led us in prayer for 2 centuries, who had taught generations of brothers about faith and duty and sacrifice. His final words were a prayer, asking the Emperor to accept his spirit. I wondered if anyone had heard him. I wondered if anyone ever heard us at all. That night, as tech priests worked to repair battle damage and apothecaries tended to wounded brothers, a single astropathic message finally arrived. Not the flood of reinforcements we had begged for, not even promises of aid to come, just a brief transmission, cold and bureaucratic, that shattered what remained of my faith in simple sentences. Crimson Guard forces on Sanctum's Fall continue current operations. Reinforcements unavailable due to sector-wide resource allocation. Extract when tactically viable. Emperor protects. I read it 3 times, looking for hidden meaning, for some indication that whoever sent it understood what they were saying. But there was nothing. Just the casual dismissal of our desperate situation, the acknowledgement that we had been deemed not worth saving. The lie that the Emperor protects, even as his servants abandoned us to die alone. Brother Captain Thalric stood beside me as I read, his face unreadable. "Reinforcements, unavailable," he said softly. "They knew. They have known all along, and they chose not to come." The words settled over me like a burial shroud, suffocating and final. They knew. For 2 weeks, someone in Sector Command had known we were here, fighting and dying, begging for aid. And they had chosen to do nothing, not because help was impossible, but because we were simply not important enough. Because other campaigns, other worlds, other forces had been deemed more worthy of support. I thought of the woman who had knelt before me, thanking me for coming, praising the Emperor for sending his angels. What would she say if she knew the truth? That we had come not because the Emperor willed it, but because we had chosen to? That no divine hand had guided us here, only our own naive faith? That the God Emperor she prayed to had never noticed her existence, never acknowledged her suffering, never cared whether she lived or died? "What do we tell the brothers?" Thalric asked. I looked at the message again, at those cold words that stripped away every comforting lie. "We tell them to prepare for extraction. We tell them we have done all we can. We tell them—" I paused, searching for words that would not break them entirely. "We tell them the Emperor works in ways we cannot understand." Another lie. But what was one more lie atop all the others? What difference did truth make when faith was the only thing keeping us from despair? We began extraction preparations the next morning, coordinating with our strike cruisers for withdrawal from the surface. We would save those civilians we could carry, perhaps 3,000 out of the millions who remained. The rest we would leave behind, to face the word-bearers and their dark gods, to die screaming prayers to an emperor who had never heard them. As I oversaw the evacuation, a child approached me, a girl perhaps 8 years old. Her face smudged with ash, her eyes too old for her years. She held up a small, carved aquila, a crude thing probably made by her father. "For you, Lord," she said. I took the carving, and it felt impossibly heavy in my armored hand. She smiled, so innocent, so faithful, so completely unaware that her protectors had come too late, that we were abandoning her world to darkness, that the Emperor she trusted had forgotten her the moment she was born, if he had ever known her at all. That night, as our ships burned for the system's edge, I stood in the observation deck watching Sanctum's Fall recede behind us. The world still burned. The temples still stood. And somewhere down there, millions still screamed prayers that would never be answered. I had thought coming here would be glorious. I had thought we would be the Emperor's answer. I had thought our faith would be rewarded. I had been wrong about everything. The message came 3 days into our withdrawal journey, transmitted through official astropathic channels with all the bureaucratic formality of a supply requisition. I stood in the Crimson Dawn's strategium, still wearing armor I had not removed since evacuating Sanctum's fall, and listened as Epistolary Varen read the words that would destroy everything I had believed for 3 centuries. To Castellan Valdor Hestin, Crimson Guard Chapter. Regarding operations on Sanctum's fall, Chapter forces directed to maintain defensive operations until extraction viable. Reinforcement request acknowledged but denied due to current strategic priorities. Imperial naval assets committed to Nakhmund Gauntlet operations. Astartes, reinforcements unavailable. Astra Militarum reserves committed to Segmentum Obscurus containment actions. Extract surviving assets and return to Chapter homeworld. Report casualty figures and gene seed recovery for Administratum records. The Emperor protects. The words hung in the air like accusations, acknowledged but denied. Current strategic priorities. Extract surviving assets. The clinical language of bureaucracy applied to our desperate stand. To the deaths of 467 battle brothers. To the abandonment of billions of souls who had begged for salvation. They knew, I said, and my voice sounded distant even to my own ears. From the beginning, they received every distress call, every plea for reinforcements, and they simply chose not to respond. Brother Captain Thalric stood beside me, his damaged augmetic eye still flickering from wounds he had not yet repaired. The Nakhmund Gauntlet operations began 2 months ago, Castellan. The Segmentum Obscurus deployments have been ongoing for half a year. These are not sudden emergencies that prevented our reinforcement. These are long-term strategic commitments that were always going to take priority over Sanctum's fall. I turned to face him, needing him to explain, needing someone to make this make sense. But Sanctum's fall had 17 billion souls. It was a forge world, critical to sector supply chains. How can it not have been a priority? Because there are thousands of worlds like Sanctum's fall, Thalric replied, his voice carrying a weariness that suggested he had already worked through this logic and found no comfort in it. And hundreds of other crises across the Imperium, each deemed more strategically vital. The Nakhmund Gauntlet must be held, or the Cicatrix Maledictum expands. Segmentum Obscurus operations prevent multiple sectors from falling to chaos. Measured against those imperatives, a single hive world becomes acceptable loss. Acceptable loss. The phrase made me want to vomit. I thought of the woman who had knelt before me, thanking me for coming. Was she an acceptable loss? Were the millions sacrificed in ritual circles acceptable losses? Were the 467 brothers of my chapter, whose gene seed now resided in Apothecary Calvin's storage vaults, acceptable losses? Who made this calculation? I demanded. Who decided that Sanctum's fall was acceptable to lose? Sector Command, most likely, Thalric said. Based on strategic assessments from multiple sources. Naval Command evaluating fleet deployment. Astra Militarum High Command determining guard priorities. The Administratum calculating resource allocation. It would not have been a single decision, but a cascade of decisions, each made by someone following established protocols for resource distribution during crisis conditions. The banality of it struck me like a physical blow. Not malice, not cruelty, not even indifference in the personal sense. Just the grinding machinery of imperial bureaucracy, processing trillions of data points and determining mathematically that some worlds mattered more than others. That some lives were worth saving and others were not. That the Crimson Guard's desperate stand was noted, filed, and ultimately irrelevant to the larger calculations of strategic necessity. And the Emperor? I asked, though I already knew I would not like the answer. Thalric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were chosen carefully, each one a brick in the wall of reality I had been trying not to see. The Emperor sits on the golden throne, maintaining the Astronomicon, sustaining the navigational beacon that allows humanity to traverse the warp. This has been his function for 10,000 years. Everything else, every decision about where forces deploy, which worlds receive aid, who lives and who dies, these are mortal decisions made by mortal administrators following mortal logic. But he guides them, I insisted, clinging to the last threads of faith. He influences their decisions through divine will. He ensures that his faithful are protected. Does he? Thalric asked, and his question carried no hostility, only exhausted curiosity. How would we know? If Sector Command makes decisions based on strategic calculus and resource availability, how would we distinguish that from divine guidance? If a world is saved because it has strategic value and abandoned when it does not, is that the Emperor's will or simply mortal pragmatism? I had no answer. I stood in the strategium of my flagship, surrounded by tactical displays and star charts, and I had no answer to the most fundamental question of my existence. How did I know the Emperor cared? How did I know he even noticed us? I had always assumed his attention, assumed his love, assumed that service to the Imperium was service to him, and therefore meaningful. But what if I had been wrong? What if we had always been alone, mistaking coincidence for providence, calling strategic necessity divine will? Request permission to access full communication archives, I said to Varen, my voice hollow. I want to see every distress call Sanctum's Fall transmitted. I want to see who received them and what responses were sent. The epistolary hesitated, his burned eye sockets turning toward me with something that might have been pity. Castellan, I am not certain this knowledge will bring you comfort. I do not seek comfort, I replied. It took hours to compile the records, pulling data from astropathic logs and communication transcripts stored in the ship's data vaults. When Varen finally presented me with the complete archive, I sequestered myself in my personal chambers and read every message, every plea, every desperate cry for help that Sanctum's Fall had transmitted into the void. The first distress call had gone out 38 days before our arrival. A straightforward alert of chaos incursion, word bearers identified. Planetary Defense Forces engaging. Request for Imperial reinforcement. It had been transmitted to 14 separate recipients. Subsector Fleet Command. 3 Space Marine chapters whose patrol zones bordered the region. Astra Militarum staging posts. Even a direct plea to the Segmentum Fortress world. The responses were sparse and devastating in their brevity. Fleet Command acknowledged receipt, stated naval assets committed elsewhere, suggested planetary PDF contained threat until fleet availability improved. The Space Marine chapters. Those proud inheritors of the Emperor's legacy, the angels of death who existed to protect humanity, had responded with similar dismissals. The Storm Lords stated they were engaged in operations against Orc forces 2 sectors away. The Silver Skulls indicated they were at under strength following recent casualties and could not deploy. The Nova Marines did not respond at all. As days passed and Sanctum's Fall's situation deteriorated, the messages grew more desperate. Detailed reports of civilian casualties, of demonic manifestations, of corrupted temples spreading warp taint across entire continents. Pleas not just for military reinforcement, but for any acknowledgement, any indication that someone heard them, that someone cared. The responses, when they came, remained coldly bureaucratic. Noted, filed, forwarded to appropriate authorities for strategic assessment. On day 23, Sanctum's Fall had transmitted directly to Terra itself, a desperate astropathic scream aimed at the throne world, begging the Emperor himself for deliverance. I do not know what I expected to find in that message's reception records. Some indication that it had reached the Golden Throne, perhaps. Some note that the Master of Mankind had heard his children's cries. There was nothing. The message had been received by the Administratum's central communication hub, logged in a database containing billions of similar transmissions, and filed for eventual processing. No indication it had ever been brought before anyone of authority. No suggestion that the Emperor, entombed in his golden prison, had any awareness of this world's suffering. Just another data point in an ocean of information, drowning in the sheer scale of the Imperium's vastness. I sat with that knowledge for a long time, feeling something fundamental break inside me. We had always been taught that the Emperor watched over his faithful, that he heard their prayers, that service to humanity was service to him. But the evidence before me suggested something far more terrible. The Emperor sat on his throne, yes, but he sat there, maintaining the Astronomicon, a psychic lighthouse that allowed ships to navigate. Everything else, all the decisions about who lived and who died, who received aid and who was abandoned, these were made by bureaucrats and generals and administrators who had never met him, never heard his voice, who simply invoked his name while making pragmatic calculations about resource allocation. The door to my chambers opened without my permission. Brother Captain Thalric entered, his augmetic eye now properly repaired, his armor cleaned of Sanctum's Fall's ashes. He looked at me, at the data slate in my hands, at whatever expression my face must have held, and he knew. "You have seen it then," he said quietly. "The machinery behind the miracle." "There is no miracle," I replied, and the words tasted like poison. "There is only logistics, resource management, strategic calculation. The Emperor does not guide these decisions because the Emperor does not make these decisions. He cannot. He sits on the golden throne, unable to move, unable to speak. And we, all of us, have built an entire theology around the assumption that he still cares about individual worlds, individual lives, that he notices when his faithful suffer and die." Thalric sat across from me, his movements careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. "I think part of me has always known," I admitted, "but I buried it beneath faith, beneath ritual, beneath the comfortable certainty that service was its own reward, because he acknowledged that service. Now I cannot unknow what I have learned. The Imperium does not operate according to divine will. It operates according to the brutal mathematics of a failing empire stretched across 1,000,000 worlds, constantly triaging which populations deserve protection and which can be abandoned to preserve more strategically valuable assets. And we are among those assets," Thalric said. "A chapter of Astartes, resource-intensive to maintain, expensive to deploy. When Sector Command received our reports from Sanctum's Fall, they would have calculated whether reinforcing us was worth the cost of diverting forces from other operations. They determined it was not. So they told us to extract and return home, to preserve what remained of our strength for future deployments they deemed more valuable. I wanted to rage against this logic, to insist that it was wrong, that human life had value beyond strategic calculation. But I had been a military commander for 3 centuries. I understood resource management, operational priorities, the necessity of sometimes sacrificing the few to save the many. What broke me was not the logic itself, but the realization that this cold pragmatism was all there was, that there was no divine hand guiding these decisions towards some higher purpose, that the Emperor's protection was not a blessing but a propaganda slogan covering the reality of abandonment. "How many other chapters know this?" I asked. "How many other Castellans and chapter masters have stood where I stand now, looking at evidence of our irrelevance to the Emperor's plans?" "The old chapters know," Thalric said. "The first founding, certainly. They fought alongside the Emperor during the Great Crusade. They watched him systematically conquer world after world, prioritizing strategic value over humanitarian concerns. The Ultramarines built an empire of 500 worlds by following ruthlessly pragmatic expansion strategies. The Imperial Fists fortified key positions and let less valuable worlds fall to save resources for more critical defenses. Even the Blood Angels and Space Wolves, for all their reputation for caring about mortal humans, made hard calculations about which populations merited protection. Then it has always been a lie, I said. The imperial creed, the worship of the emperor as a god who loves his subjects, the promise that faith will be rewarded, all of it carefully crafted mythology to keep populations compliant while administrators make utilitarian decisions about their survival. Not a lie, exactly, Thalric corrected gently. A necessary fiction. The Imperium is too vast for any single being to manage, even one as powerful as the Emperor may once have been. It requires billions of humans to make billions of decisions every day. The faith in the Emperor gives those decisions moral weight, provides a shared framework for cooperation across thousands of different cultures. Without that unifying theology, the Imperium would fragment into warring factions within a generation. I understood the logic. I even agreed with it intellectually. But emotionally, the betrayal was absolute. I had given everything to serve the Emperor. My humanity, my identity, my centuries of life. And now I discovered that he had never asked for that service, never acknowledged it, perhaps never even knew I existed. I was not his faithful servant, but a tool created by mortals to serve mortal institutions that simply invoked his name for legitimacy. What do we tell the brothers? I asked. The same question Thalric had posed to me after we received the extraction order. But now it carried different weight, different implications. We tell them nothing, Thalric said firmly. The chapter needs faith to function. Without belief in higher purpose, without the certainty that our sacrifices serve the Emperor's design, we are just killers following orders. The truth would destroy morale, create factions, potentially drive brothers to despair or worse. Some truths are too heavy to share. So we lie, I said bitterly. We perpetuate the same comfortable fictions that have been used to manipulate us. We tell them the Emperor works in mysterious ways, that Sanctum's fall's abandonment was part of some divine plan we cannot comprehend. We ask them to have faith when we ourselves no longer believe. Yes, Thalric said simply. Because the alternative is watching the chapter tear itself apart. Because some brothers will cling to faith no matter what evidence we present, and others will embrace the truth with relief or horror. And those two groups will be unable to coexist. Because we are leaders, Castellan. And leaders sometimes bear burdens alone so their followers do not have to. I knew he was right. I knew that sharing this knowledge would cause more harm than good. But the thought of standing before my brothers, of leading them in prayers I no longer believed, of invoking an emperor who did not hear us while pretending his silence was part of some greater plan, the thought of that hypocrisy made me want to tear off my armor and walk into the void. I cannot do it, I whispered. I cannot lead them in faith I do not possess. Every prayer would be a lie. Every invocation of his name would be mockery. How can I ask them to believe when I do not? Because they need you to, Thalric replied. Because the chapter cannot function without leadership that projects certainty. Because your doubt, however justified, is a luxury we cannot afford. He paused, his augmetic eye focusing on me with inhuman precision. Or we could tell them the truth and watch what happens. Some will thank you for your honesty. Some will call you heretic and demand your execution. Most will simply break, left adrift without the anchor of faith that has sustained them through centuries of war. Is that preferable to maintaining a comfortable lie? I had no answer. Both choices felt like betrayal. Lying to my brothers meant perpetuating their exploitation, using their faith as a tool to keep them compliant, while knowing that faith was built on foundations of sand. But telling them the truth meant destroying the very certainty that made them effective, stripping away the purpose that justified their sacrifices. Either way, I would be complicit in something monstrous. There is a third option, I said slowly, an idea forming even as I spoke. We could investigate further, find more evidence, speak to other chapters that have experienced similar abandonments, build a complete picture of how the Imperium truly functions, of whether the Emperor's protection is real or simply administrative efficiency dressed in theological language. If we are going to abandon faith, we should at least. Abandonment is justified. Thalric considered this, his expression unreadable. And if the investigation confirms what we already suspect, if we find that every chapter has experienced moments like ours, that abandonment and sacrifice and unanswered prayers are simply the reality of serving an empire too vast for any god to truly oversee, what then? Then we decide, with full knowledge, what kind of chapter we wish to be, whether we serve out of genuine faith or pragmatic necessity, whether we tell our brothers the truth or protect them from it. But at least the choice will be informed rather than reflexive. Very well, Thalric agreed. But we must be careful. The Inquisition watches for exactly this kind of doubt. Astartes, questioning the imperial faith, are deemed potentially corrupted, vulnerable to chaos whispers. If word spreads that the Crimson Guard's leadership has begun investigating the Emperor's true nature and function, we will find ourselves subject to scrutiny we cannot afford. The warning was valid. The Inquisition existed partly to suppress exactly this kind of dangerous knowledge, to maintain the theological unity that held the Imperium together. Astartes, who questioned too deeply, who pulled too hard at the threads of imperial mythology, were branded as heretics and destroyed before their doubts could spread. We would have to be subtle, careful, conducting our investigation through quiet channels and personal contacts rather than official inquiries. Over the following weeks, as we traveled back to Astral Meridian, I reached out to contacts in other chapters, brothers I had fought alongside during joint operations, officers who owed me favors or shared my philosophical inclinations. I phrased my questions carefully, asking about their experiences with Imperial support, about times they had requested reinforcement and been denied, about the theological frameworks they used to understand abandonment and sacrifice. The responses, when they came, painted a picture both clearer and more damning than I had feared. Every chapter, it seemed, had experienced moments like ours. The Lamenters, cursed with endless misfortune, had been abandoned so many times that their history was a catalogue of desperate stands without support. The Celestial Lions had been nearly destroyed after questioning the Inquisition, their repeated requests for aid ignored until they were reduced to barely a company's strength. Even famous chapters like the Salamanders spoke quietly of worlds they had been unable to save, of distress calls that went unanswered because other priorities took precedence. And the first founding chapters, those proud inheritors of the Primarch's legacies, they confirmed what Thalric had suggested. They knew the Emperor's true function, knew that he no longer directed imperial policy beyond maintaining the Astronomicon. They had known for 10,000 years, since the Horus heresy wounded him and forced him onto the Golden Throne. They simply did not speak of it openly, maintaining the fiction of divine guidance for the benefit of younger chapters and mortal populations who needed that faith to function. We have always been alone. One veteran of the Dark Angels told me during a carefully encrypted Vox conversation. The Emperor gave us his gene seed, his technology, his vision during the Great Crusade. But he never promised to watch over us individually. He built an empire meant to survive his absence, meant to continue functioning through human institutions and human decisions. That we turned him into a god after his wounding, that we built a theology around his silence that was humanity's choice, not his. He never asked to be worshipped. We simply needed something to worship. And he was the most convenient option. The words should have brought clarity, resolution, the comfort of confirmed suspicion. Instead, they brought only a deeper sense of betrayal, not by the Emperor, who had apparently never claimed divinity or promised protection, by the machinery of faith and propaganda that had spent 10,000 years building him into something he had never been. Every prayer I had spoken, every moment of certainty I had felt in his presence, every time I had thanked him for guidance or protection, I had been praying to a fiction, a theological construct built atop a dying man's unmoving body. We arrived at Astral Meridian 32 days after departing Sanctum's fall. The fortress monastery looked exactly as we had left it, granite cliffs and soaring towers, the same mountain stronghold that had housed our chapter for 3 millennia. But I saw it differently now. Not a holy place blessed by the Emperor's grace, but simply a military installation, stone and ceramite and tactical positioning, its only divinity the human effort that had built it. The brothers who had remained behind to guard the homeworld met us at the landing platforms, expecting a triumphant return. Instead, they found 633 survivors from 1,000 who had deployed, armor still scarred from battle, gene seed vaults containing the legacy of 467 dead brothers. Brother Sergeant Davian, who had served as acting Castellan during our absence, looked at our reduced numbers with visible shock. "What happened?" he asked, his voice carrying disbelief that an engagement could cost so much. "We fought a war we could not win," I replied, "against an enemy we could not defeat, with support that never came. Sanctum's fall is lost. The word-bearers control it now. 17 billion souls abandoned to chaos because reinforcing them was not strategically viable." I watched Davian process this, saw his faithful mind trying to make sense of it, searching for the theological explanation that would preserve his certainty. "But surely," he said slowly, "the Emperor has a purpose in this. Surely he allowed this outcome for reasons we cannot yet comprehend. Perhaps those souls were meant to be martyrs, their suffering serving some greater design." The words that had once comforted me now enraged me. How convenient that every abandonment could be explained as divine plan. How perfectly the theology protected itself from criticism by declaring that anything that happened, no matter how horrific, must be part of the Emperor's will. It was unfalsifiable, circular logic that excused every failure, explained away every atrocity, demanded faith even in the face of overwhelming evidence that no one was listening to prayers. "Perhaps," I said, "because I could not yet speak the truth aloud. Or perhaps we were simply not important enough to save. Perhaps the Emperor's protection extends only as far as strategic necessity allows. Perhaps we should stop pretending that faith guarantees anything beyond our own willingness to die for comfortable lies." Davian looked at me with something approaching horror. "Castellan, you speak dangerously. These doubts, they sound like the whispers of chaos, trying to corrupt your faith through exhaustion and grief. Do they?" I asked. "Or do they sound like someone who has finally looked honestly at how the Imperium functions? Someone who has seen behind the propaganda and found only human administrators making human decisions while invoking a God who never speaks, never intervenes, never does anything except maintain a psychic lighthouse that serves strategic rather than moral purposes?" "Castellan," Thalric interjected, his voice carrying warning. "This is not the time or place." He was right. I was allowing exhaustion and anger to speak through me, risking exactly the kind of open doubt that would draw inquisitorial attention. I closed my eyes, forced my breathing to slow, imposed calm through sheer will. "Forgive me, brothers," I said. "The campaign was difficult. I speak from weariness. Brother Sergeant Davian, please coordinate with Apothecary Calvin regarding gene seed processing and memorial preparations for our fallen brothers. Brother Captain Thalric, establish a debriefing schedule for all returning officers. I will retire to my chambers to compose the required reports for the administratum." They accepted this. My brothers, who still believed, who still had faith that I was leading them according to divine will. They dispersed to their duties, leaving me alone on the landing platform, looking out over the valley where human settlers lived and worked and prayed to an emperor who did not hear them. I had thought finding truth would bring liberation. Instead, it brought only the crushing weight of responsibility. I now carried knowledge that could destroy my chapter if spoken openly. That would brand me heretic if discovered by the Inquisition. That made every prayer I led and every invocation I spoke feel like participation in humanity's greatest and most necessary lie. The Emperor did not protect. He never had. We protected, or we did not, based on pragmatic calculations about resource allocation and strategic priority. And 17 billion souls on Sanctum's Fall had learned, in their final screaming moments, that being faithful was no guarantee of being valued. I was Castellan Valdor Hestin of the Crimson Guard. I led 10,000 souls in the Emperor's name, and I no longer knew if that name meant anything at all. The nightmares began 3 weeks after our return to Astral Meridian. I would lie on my meditation slab in the darkness of my chambers, and instead of the transhuman rest that should have claimed me, I found myself back on Sanctum's Fall, walking through streets carpeted with bodies, hearing the prayers of the dying echoing from ruined hab blocks, watching that child hand me the carved Aquila, while behind her the entire world burned, abandoned, forgotten, deemed acceptable loss by administrators who had never learned her name. I would wake with her face before me, that innocent smile, that absolute faith that the Emperor's angels would protect her, and I would remember that we had left her there, that I had taken her gift, boarded my ship, and abandoned her to corruption and death because staying would have meant losing the entire chapter. The logic was sound. The tactical necessity was undeniable. But logic and necessity did not silence her screams in my dreams. Brother Apothecary Calvin noticed first. He came to me during morning weapons training, watching as I worked through combat forms with a practice blade, my movements lacking their usual precision. When I finally stopped, breathing harder than I should have been, he approached with medical concern written across his augmented features. Castellan, your reaction times are diminished by approximately 15%. Your neural patterns suggest insufficient rest cycles. When did you last achieve proper sleep? Sleep is irrelevant, I replied, though I knew he was right. There is work to be done. The chapter needs rebuilding. The fallen brothers require memorial services. The Administratum demands detailed reports on Sanctum's Fall engagement parameters and resource expenditure. The chapter needs its Castellan functional, Calvin said firmly. Whatever burden you carry, it is affecting your combat effectiveness and cognitive processing. This serves no one, least of all the brothers who depend on your leadership. I wanted to tell him, wanted to unburden myself of the terrible knowledge that had been eating me alive since I read those communication archives. But Thalric's warning echoed in my mind. Some truths are too heavy to share. The chapter needed faith to function, and my doubt was a poison that would infect them all. I will rest. I lied. Thank you for your concern, brother. But I did not rest. I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The millions we had failed. The billions more across the Imperium who prayed to an emperor who did not hear them, who believed their faith mattered when it was only strategic value that determined who lived and who died. And I heard my own voice, leading my brothers in prayers I no longer believed, speaking liturgies that felt like mockery. The chapter's daily rituals became torture. Each morning we gathered in the great chapel for prayers, 1,000 voices speaking in unison the words we had spoken for 3 millennia. The Emperor protects. In life and in death, we serve. His light guides us. His will sustains us. I led them, as I had always led them, my voice carrying the same certainty it always had. But inside, I was screaming. Every word felt like a lie. Every invocation felt like participating in humanity's exploitation, using their faith as a tool to keep them compliant, while knowing that faith was built on nothing. Brother Chaplain Mordrin was dead, killed on Sanctum's Fall. So the duty of leading spiritual instruction fell to his successor, Brother Chaplain Castellan. He was young by chaplain standards, only 80 years of service. His faith still bright and uncomplicated. He led the brothers in theological discussions, guiding them through questions about purpose and sacrifice, providing the comfortable answers that the imperial creed offered for every doubt. Why do the faithful suffer? One young battle brother asked during an instruction session I attended. Why does the emperor allow good people to die in agony? Because suffering purifies, Castellan answered with absolute confidence. Because through tribulation, faith is tested and proven. Because the emperor knows that a comfortable life breeds weakness, while hardship forges strength. Every moment of pain the faithful endure brings them closer to his grace, prepares their souls for unity with his divine essence upon death. I listened to this answer, this theological justification for abandonment and cruelty, and felt my hands clench into fists. How convenient. How perfectly designed to make victims thank their oppressor, to make the abandoned praise the one who abandoned them. Suffering purifies. Pain is holy. Your agony serves a divine purpose, even if you never understand what that purpose is. It was genius, really. As systems of control went, it turned every atrocity into evidence of God's love. After the session, I approached Castellan in private, in the small chamber adjacent to the chapel, where chaplains prepared for services. He looked up from the devotional texts he was reviewing, his skull-faced helm resting on the table beside him, his scarred face earnest and faithful. "You spoke well today," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "The brother seemed comforted by your wisdom. Thank you, Castellan. Though the wisdom is not mine but the emperor's, transmitted through centuries of theological tradition, I am merely a vessel for his truth." "And what if the truth is not what we have been taught?" I asked, unable to stop myself. What if suffering does not purify, but simply destroys? What if the faithful die in agony not because it serves some divine purpose, but because they were not strategically valuable enough to save? Castellan's expression shifted to concern. "Castellan, these questions sound like doubt, like the kind of spiritual crisis that the Codex Astartes warns can follow traumatic campaigns. Sanctum's fall weighed heavily on us all. Perhaps you should spend more time in meditation, in prayer, seeking the Emperor's guidance through this difficult period." "I have prayed," I said bitterly. "For weeks, I have prayed, and I have heard only silence. No guidance, no comfort, no indication that anyone is listening, just void. And my own voice, echoing back at me. That is the test," Castellan replied, his voice carrying the patient tone of one explaining simple concepts to the confused. "Faith is not faith. If it requires constant validation, the Emperor remains silent so that we may prove our devotion through continued service despite that silence. He tests us, Castellan, and we must not fail that test by demanding answers he has chosen not to provide." The circular logic was infuriating. Silence was proof of divine testing rather than evidence of absence. Abandonment was part of his plan rather than simple administrative failure. Every piece of evidence that suggested no one was listening was reinterpreted as proof that someone was listening but choosing not to respond. The theology protected itself perfectly, immunizing believers against any evidence that might challenge their faith. "What if he is silent because he is not there?" I asked quietly. "What if the golden throne holds only a corpse, and everything we believe about his protection and guidance is comfortable fiction to help us accept that we are utterly alone?" Castellan stood abruptly, his face hardening. "Castellan, you speak heresy. The Emperor lives. He maintains the Astronomicon. He guides the Imperium through his divine will. To suggest otherwise is to embrace the lies of chaos, to open yourself to corruption through doubt. I must ask, as your chaplain and spiritual guide, whether you have been experiencing any unusual thoughts, any whispers that seem to come from outside yourself, any sense of presence beyond your own consciousness. So, I understood what he was asking. He thought I might be corrupted, that chaos entities were exploiting my doubt to turn me from the Emperor's light. It was the standard response to any questioning, any doubt, any suggestion that imperial theology might not reflect reality. Question the faith, and you must be possessed. Doubt the Emperor, and demons must be whispering in your ear. It eliminated the possibility that doubt might be rational, justified, based on honest observation rather than supernatural corruption. No, I said, though I wondered if he would believe me. No whispers, no corruption, only the evidence of my own eyes and the questions any rational being would ask when confronted with that evidence. But I understand this conversation troubles you, brother. Forget I spoke, I will. Meditate on these matters privately. I left before he could press further, but I knew the damage was done. Castellan would report his concerns to the senior officers, perhaps even file a report with the Inquisition if he deemed my doubt sufficient threat. I was being watched now. My words and actions scrutinized for signs of corruption. The cage was tightening. That night, I found myself in the chapter's archives, searching through records that dated back to our founding. If the first founding chapters knew the truth about the Emperor's function, perhaps our own history contained hints, evidence that previous Castellans had grappled with these same questions. I pulled data slates containing the personal journals of my predecessors, looking for cracks in their certainty. Moments when doubt had surfaced only to be buried again beneath faith. What I found was worse than I had imagined. Multiple Castellans had experienced exactly what I was experiencing. Moments when imperial support failed, when prayers went unanswered, when the machinery of faith revealed itself as simply machinery. But each time, rather than acknowledge the pattern, they had doubled down on belief, attributed their doubts to weakness, to exhaustion, to the whispers of chaos. They had seen the evidence and chosen to unsee it, to bury it beneath renewed devotion, to preserve their certainty at the cost of honesty. One entry from Castellan Valdor, who had led the chapter 800 years ago, struck me with particular force. We returned from the Vortan massacre today, having lost 300 brothers defending a world that received no support despite months of distress calls. I find myself questioning why the Emperor allowed such abandonment, why our prayers for reinforcement went unanswered. But I know these thoughts are dangerous. The first step toward corruption. Faith does not require understanding. Faith is trust without evidence. Tomorrow, I will lead the brothers in prayers of thanksgiving for the privilege of sacrifice, and I will bury these doubts so deep they can never surface again. He had known. He had seen the same patterns, asked the same questions, reached the same horrifying conclusions, and then he had deliberately chosen to forget, to force himself back into faith through sheer will, to sacrifice honesty for the comfort of certainty. How many other Castellans had done the same? How many across all the chapters had glimpsed the truth and turned away, choosing the lie because the truth was too terrible to bear? I could not do what they had done, could not unsee what I had seen, could not force myself back into faith through deliberate self-deception. The knowledge had changed me fundamentally, and no amount of prayer or meditation would restore my former certainty. I was broken, and I could not repair myself by simply pretending I was whole. Brother Captain Thalric found me in the archives near dawn, surrounded by data slates and ancient journals, my armor still bearing the stains of the previous day's training. He looked at the materials I had been reading, at the titles visible on the slates, and his augmetic eye focused with understanding. "You are searching for others who doubted," he said, not a question but a statement. "I found them," I replied. "Castellans, captains, even chaplains occasionally. All of them experienced what I am experiencing. All of them saw the evidence. And all of them chose to bury it, to force themselves back into belief rather than acknowledge what the evidence clearly showed. Because acknowledging it would have destroyed them, Thalric said, sitting across from me amid the scattered records. Because humans need purpose, need meaning, need to believe their suffering serves some higher design. Without that belief, without faith that our sacrifices matter to something beyond human calculation, we become just killers following orders, weapons without purpose. And that truth is unbearable for most. But it is the truth, I insisted. And living according to lies, no matter how comforting, is still living a lie. How can we claim to serve truth, to stand against corruption, when our entire belief system is built on self-deception? Because the alternative is madness. Thalric replied bluntly. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds. Trillions of humans live and die believing the Emperor watches over them, that their faith matters, that their prayers are heard. If they learned the truth, that they are simply resources to be managed by administrators who calculate their strategic value, the entire system would collapse. Not immediately, but gradually, as populations lost the motivation to sacrifice, to serve, to accept their suffering. The lie is necessary. It always has been. I wanted to argue, but I could not find the words, because he was right. I had seen faithful populations accept horrific conditions because they believed those conditions served the Emperor's will. I had seen soldiers charge into certain death because they believed the Emperor would receive their souls. The faith was a tool of control. Yes, but it was also what held the Imperium together, what gave meaning to lives that would otherwise be meaningless suffering in service to uncaring machinery. Then we are complicit, I said quietly. Every prayer we lead, every sermon we allow our chaplains to deliver, every time we invoke the Emperor's protection knowing it is empty words, we are complicit in humanity's exploitation. We use their faith as a weapon against them, to keep them obedient and willing to die for an empire that views them as expendable resources. Yes, Thalric agreed simply. We are complicit. Every officer in the Imperium is complicit, from the lowliest commissar to the High Lords of Terra themselves. We maintain the lie because the truth would cause more suffering than the deception. That is the burden of leadership, Castellan. Bearing the weight of necessary evils so that those we lead do not have to. I cannot bear it, I admitted, and shame flooded through me at the confession. I cannot stand before my brothers and speak words I do not believe. I cannot pray to an emperor I know does not hear us. I cannot maintain the fiction when every word feels like choking on my own dishonesty. Thalric was silent for a long moment, his augmetic eye dim, his scarred face thoughtful. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of careful consideration. Then perhaps you should not be Castellan anymore. The suggestion struck me like a physical blow. Resign? I had been Castellan for a century, had led the Crimson Guard through dozens of campaigns, had shaped the chapter according to what I believed were the Emperor's designs. To step down would be admitting defeat, acknowledging that my doubt had rendered me unfit for command. Who would lead them? I asked. Brother Sergeant Davian, Thalric replied. His faith is absolute, uncomplicated by the questions that torture you. He believes without doubt, serves without hesitation. He would lead the chapter as it has always been led, maintaining the traditions and certainties that you can no longer provide. And what would I do? The question came out more desperate than I intended. Where does a Castellan go when he can no longer believe? That would be your choice to make. Some brothers in your position have requested assignment to the Death Watch, serving the Inquisition in long-term deployments, far from their home chapter. Others have sought absolution through penitent crusades, throwing themselves into the most dangerous missions until they find either renewed faith or honorable death. Some have simply disappeared, walking into the wilderness, never to be seen again. The options were bleak but honest. I could see the logic in each path. Leaving would protect my brothers from my doubt, would allow them to continue their service with the faith that sustained them. But it would also feel like abandonment, like running from the hard work of reconciling truth with duty. "I need time," I said, "to think, to understand what I have learned and what it means for my service." "Time is something we do not have in abundance," Thalric warned. "Brother Chaplain Castellan has already filed a report with the senior officers regarding your spiritual crisis. Within days, that report will likely be forwarded to the Inquisition as a potential corruption concern. Once the Inquisition takes interest, your choices become significantly more limited." The Inquisition. I had known this was coming, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way I had been avoiding. If inquisitors decided I was corrupted, they would not care about my honest doubts or rational questions. They would see only a threat to the imperial faith, a potential vector for chaos infection that needed to be eliminated before it spread. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Perhaps a week before they arrive. Perhaps less if Castellan escalates his concerns. The Inquisition does not take lightly reports of Astartes' leadership questioning the Emperor's divinity. A week, 7 days to decide whether to maintain the lie and destroy myself slowly through dishonesty, or speak the truth and be destroyed quickly as a heretic. 7 days to determine whether my brothers deserved honest leadership that acknowledged reality, or faithful leadership that preserved comforting illusions. 7 days to reconcile the irreconcilable. To find purpose in service to an empire built on exploitation. To accept that everything I had believed was carefully crafted fiction designed to extract maximum sacrifice from those who could least afford to give it. I thought of Sanctum's fall, of those billions who had died praying to an emperor who never heard them. I thought of my fallen brothers, 467 warriors whose last thoughts had probably been prayers for his protection. I thought of the child with her carved Aquila, smiling as she blessed me with faith I knew was worthless. They had all believed. They had all trusted that their faith mattered, that their suffering served some higher purpose. And they had all been wrong, had died believing lies that made their deaths easier for the Imperium to accept. If I resigned, if I fled, if I sought death in some distant crusade, I would be allowing that cycle to continue. The next Castellan would lead the chapter according to the same comfortable fictions, and nothing would change except my own participation in the deception. But if I stayed, if I tried to lead while carrying this knowledge, what could I possibly offer my brothers except the same poison that was killing me? How could I guide them when I no longer knew where we should be going? How could I speak of the Emperor's will when I knew that will was simply human bureaucracy dressed in theological language? I do not know what to do, I confessed to Thalric, and the words felt like final defeat. I do not know how to serve when service feels like participation in exploitation. I do not know how to lead when leadership requires maintaining lies I cannot bring myself to speak. Then perhaps, Thalric said gently, you need to speak with others who have faced this crisis and survived it. Brothers from other chapters who have grappled with these questions and found some accommodation between truth and duty. You are not the first to stand where you stand now, Castellan, and the fact that other chapters continue to function suggests there are ways forward you have not yet considered. It was a slim hope, but it was hope nonetheless. Somewhere in the Imperium there must be others like me, brothers who had seen behind the veil and chosen neither blind faith nor complete despair. If I could find them, speak with them, learn how they reconciled honest observation with continued service, perhaps I could find a path forward that did not require either self-destruction or abandonment of my duty. Arrange communication, I ordered. Quiet channels, encrypted if possible. I need to speak with brothers from the first founding chapters, veterans who have served long enough to have experienced what I am experiencing. If they know the truth and still serve, they must have found some way to bear it. It will take time to establish those contacts securely, Thalric warned. And the Inquisition may arrive before those conversations can occur. We are taking significant risks. Everything is risk now, I replied, but I would rather risk inquisitorial attention-seeking truth than resign myself to either comfortable lies or empty despair. If I am going to be destroyed for heresy, let it at least be for heresy in pursuit of understanding rather than heresy born of ignorance. Over the following days, I existed in a strange liminal state. Publicly, I continued my duties as Castellan, leading training exercises, reviewing reports, coordinating chapter operations. But privately, I was hollow, going through motions that felt increasingly meaningless. The prayers I led tasted like ashes. The devotions I performed felt like mockery. And always, in the back of my mind, the knowledge that inquisitors were coming, that my time was running out, that soon I would have to account for my doubts before judges who viewed doubt itself as evidence of corruption. Brother Sergeant Davian approached me during evening weapons maintenance, his face troubled. He knelt beside me as I cleaned my bolt pistol, the ancient weapon that had served 7 Castellans before me, and spoke with the careful concern of one addressing a superior he suspects may be unstable. Castellan, the brothers have noticed your distance. They sense something wrong, even if they do not understand what. As your second in command, I must ask, are you fit to lead? If you need time to recover from Sanctum's fall, if you need to step aside temporarily while you regain your spiritual balance, I would gladly bear the burden until you are ready to resume command. It was kindly meant, I knew. Davian genuinely cared for my well-being and for the chapter's cohesion. But I heard in his words the beginning of what would come next. Quiet suggestions that I step aside, that I seek spiritual counseling, that I allow more faithful leadership to guide the chapter while I dealt with my crisis. It would be framed as concern, as mercy, but it would end with my removal from command, one way or another. I am managing, brother, I lied. Thank you for your concern. The chapter remains my priority. He looked at me with eyes that wanted to believe but clearly harbored doubt. Castellan, permission to speak freely. Granted, Brother Chaplain Castellan has expressed concerns about your spiritual state. He believes you may be experiencing a crisis of faith, following the losses at Sanctum's fall. As your brother, I share those concerns. Whatever doubts you harbor, whatever questions torture you, please know that you do not have to bear them alone. The chapter is here to support you, to help you find your way back to certainty. Back to certainty. As if certainty was something I had lost through carelessness. Something I could recover if only I tried hard enough. As if I had not been forced into uncertainty by overwhelming evidence. As if my doubt was irrational, rather than the only rational response to what I had learned. I appreciate your concern, I said, forcing warmth into my voice. Truly, brother. But some burdens must be borne alone. Some questions have no easy answers. I will find my way through this. In my own time, through my own methods. Davian nodded, but I could see he remained unconvinced. He would report this conversation to the senior officers, to Castellan, perhaps directly to whoever was coordinating with the Inquisition. The walls were closing in, and I had perhaps days before the facade I was maintaining collapsed entirely. That night, I received the communication I had been waiting for. A carefully encrypted Vox transmission from a veteran of the Ultramarines, a battle brother named Lucian, who had served for 7 centuries and had, according to Thalric's contacts, experienced similar doubts following the Zeist campaign, where an entire subsector had been abandoned to tyrannid consumption. I took the transmission in my private chambers, ensuring no one could overhear. Castellan Hestin, the voice crackled through the Vox. distorted by encryption but still carrying unmistakable weariness. I understand you have questions about faith, about the Emperor's attention, about the realities of how the Imperium functions. I do, I confirmed. And I am told you have grappled with similar questions and found some way to continue serving despite them. I need to understand how. How do you lead when you know the faith you invoke is built on foundations of sand? There was a long pause, filled only with the hiss of vox static. When Lucian spoke again, his words carried the weight of hard-won understanding. You do not serve because the faith is true, he said. You serve because the alternative to service is watching humanity die. The Emperor may not hear our prayers. He may not guide our actions. He may not even truly be alive in any meaningful sense. But the Astronomicon still functions. The warp still tears at reality. And humanity still needs defenders willing to stand between it and annihilation. That is enough. It has to be enough. But we use their faith against them, I protested. We tell them the Emperor protects, knowing he does not. We invoke his will to justify abandonment, to extract sacrifice from populations who believe their suffering serves divine purpose. How is that any different from the corruption we claim to fight? Dan, it is different because we fight for humanity's survival rather than its annihilation, Lucian replied. Chaos corrupts because corruption itself is the goal. Because the dark gods feed on suffering without purpose. We maintain the imperial faith because without it, the Imperium fragments into warring factions that chaos can easily consume. The lie serves survival. That is the distinction. A pragmatic answer, I said. But it does not address the fundamental dishonesty. We are still exploiting people's faith, still using their belief as a tool to control them. Yes, Lucian agreed simply. We are. And that knowledge should weigh on you, should make you uncomfortable, should prevent you from ever taking the easy path of believing your own propaganda. The moment you become comfortable with the necessary lies is the moment you become simply another exploiter rather than a reluctant participant in the machinery of survival. Hold on to your doubt, Castellan. Let it keep you honest even as you speak the necessary lies. His words resonated with something I had been struggling to articulate. The goal was not to force myself back into faith, to bury my doubts beneath renewed certainty. The goal was to serve despite doubt, to acknowledge the exploitation while still participating in it, because the alternative was worse. It was not comfort he offered, but a framework for bearing discomfort, for accepting complicity while never excusing it. And the Inquisition? I asked. If they come, if they question my faith, what do I tell them? Tell them you have doubts, Lucian said, surprising me. Tell them you struggle with the weight of command, that you question whether you are worthy of bearing the Emperor's trust. Frame it as personal inadequacy rather than theological skepticism. The Inquisition expects Astartes to doubt themselves, to worry they fall short of the Emperor's standards. That kind of doubt they understand and even respect. It is only when you doubt him rather than yourself that they become concerned. It was manipulation, reframing honest questions as humble self-criticism. But it might work, might buy me time to find some stable ground between faith and despair. I thanked Lucian for his counsel and ended the transmission, feeling not comforted exactly, but slightly less adrift. I was Castellan Valdor Hestin of the Crimson Guard. I no longer believed in the Emperor's protection or divine will, but I still served humanity, still stood between it and the darkness, still led my brothers in wars that needed fighting. The faith might be fiction, but the need was real. Perhaps that could be enough. Perhaps it had to be. The Inquisition would arrive within days, and I would face them knowing exactly what I was. Not a true believer, not a heretic, but something more complicated and more painful. A faithful servant of an absent God, maintaining necessary lies while dying inside from the weight of truth. The Inquisition arrived on the 5th day, their black ship translating into orbit with the kind of precision that spoke of practiced intimidation. I watched from the fortress monastery's observation deck as their shuttle descended, bearing the mark of the Ordo Hereticus, the branch dedicated to rooting out heresy within the Imperium's own ranks. Brother Captain Thalric stood beside me, his augmetic eye tracking the craft's approach. "Inquisitor Voke," he said quietly, having accessed the identification codes. Known for philosophical approach to investigations. That could be fortunate or devastating, depending on his conclusions. "At least he will listen before executing me," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. The waiting had been worse than the arrival. Now there would be resolution one way or another. But before I could descend to greet the Inquisitor, Brother Sergeant Davian appeared in the doorway, flanked by a dozen battle brothers in full armor, their bolters held at ready positions. His face was set with righteous determination, the expression of one absolutely certain of his course. "Castellan Valdor Hestin," he said formally. "By authority vested in me by Brother Chaplain Castellan and the assembled senior officers of the Crimson Guard, I am placing you under chapter arrest pending investigation of suspected spiritual corruption. You will surrender your weapons and confine yourself to quarters until the Inquisitor can properly assess your fitness for command." The words hung in the air like the pronouncement of sentence. I looked at the brothers arrayed behind Davian, recognizing each face. Battle Brother Marcus, who I had personally recommended for promotion. Brother Sergeant Thalen, who had served under my command for 4 decades. Brother Champion Victress, who had stood at my side during the defense of Sanctum's fall. All of them now pointing weapons at me, their faith in the Emperor absolute, their certainty unshaken, their devotion demanding they remove any threat to the chapter's spiritual purity. "You believe I am corrupted," I said, not a question but a statement of understanding. "I believe you doubt," Davian replied, his voice carrying pain beneath its firmness. "I believe the horrors of Sanctum's fall have wounded your faith, opened you to questions that serve only to undermine your certainty. I believe you need time away from command, need spiritual counseling, and perhaps even psychic examination to ensure chaos has not touched your mind. This is not punishment, Castellan. This is intervention, an act of brotherhood to save you from yourself. I could have fought. My armor was sealed, my weapons ready, my transhuman reflexes more than capable of cutting through their formation before they could react. But what would that accomplish? Killing brothers who acted out of genuine faith, out of concern for my soul and the chapter's integrity? That would only confirm their worst fears, would transform me from doubter to traitor in a single act of violence. "I understand," I said, and I carefully removed my bolt pistol, laying it on the observation deck's railing. "I will comply with chapter arrest. But I wish to speak with Brother Sergeant Davian privately before I confine myself." Davian looked uncertain, clearly torn between maintaining security and granting a reasonable request from his commander. Finally he nodded, signaling his brothers to wait outside. When the door sealed behind them, leaving us alone in the observation chamber, he visibly relaxed, the formal posture giving way to the genuine concern of a brother for someone he cared about. "Castellan," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Now you question everything, doubt the very foundations of our service. What if there is no way back?" I asked gently. "What if what happened to me was not loss of faith but discovery of truth? What if everything we believe about the Emperor's protection and divine will is simply comfortable fiction, and I have been forced to acknowledge that fiction because the evidence became overwhelming?" Davian flinched as if I had struck him. "You cannot mean that. You cannot truly believe the Emperor does not watch over us, does not guide our actions, does not receive our prayers. Why can I not believe it?" I pressed, needing him to engage with the question rather than simply reject it. "Because it contradicts what we have been taught? Because accepting it would be painful?" Truth does not care about our comfort, Davian. It simply is, regardless of whether we wish to acknowledge it. But the evidence, Davian protested. We have seen his miracles. We have felt his presence in moments of prayer. We have witnessed impossible victories that could only be explained by divine intervention. Have we? I asked. Or have we witnessed skilled warriors executing effective tactics, then attributed our survival to divine favor because we were taught to interpret success as blessing? When we win, we thank the Emperor. When we lose, we call it his mysterious plan. The theology is designed to be unfalsifiable, to explain any outcome as proof of his involvement. But what if our victories come from our training and our losses from simple tactical failure? What if there is no divine hand, only human effort and the random chances of war? Davian shook his head violently, as if trying to physically reject my words. No, I cannot accept that. If what you say is true, then everything we have suffered, everyone we have lost, it was all for nothing. Our brothers did not die in the Emperor's service, but simply died following orders from mortal commanders who made pragmatic calculations about resource allocation. That makes their sacrifice meaningless. Does it? I challenged. If Brother Sergeant Gaius died protecting those children on Sanctum's Fall, does his sacrifice mean less because the Emperor did not personally command it? If Battle Brother Lucan held that choke point to save civilians, is his courage diminished because no divine will guided him? Perhaps their actions mean more precisely because they were human choices, made without guarantee of divine reward, done simply because they were right. You twist everything, Davian said, his voice rising with distress. You take the sacred and make it profane, strip away the meaning until only mechanics remain. But faith is not about evidence or proof. Faith is about trust, about believing even when we cannot see, about serving a purpose greater than ourselves. You ask me to abandon that faith based on your doubts, your questions, your inability to accept that some things must be taken on trust rather than demanding proof. I ask you to consider the possibility, I replied, not to abandon faith immediately, but to honestly examine whether the evidence supports what we have been taught. Look at Sanctum's Fall. Look at the communication records. Look at the pattern of how the Imperium truly functions versus how we are told it functions. Then decide for yourself whether faith in the Emperor's personal attention is justified or simply comforting self-deception. I have already decided, Davian said firmly. When I was a boy on my hive world, my family was trapped in a hab block collapse. We should have died, crushed beneath tons of rockcrete and metal. But I prayed, Castellan. For hours, I prayed to the Emperor to save us. And he did. Rescue crews arrived, dug through rubble that should have taken days to clear in mere hours. They pulled us out alive. That was not coincidence. That was not human effort alone. That was him answering the prayer of a frightened child. I looked at Davian's earnest face, at the conviction burning in his eyes, and I understood that no evidence would ever shake him. He had built his entire identity on that childhood experience, had interpreted his survival through a theological lens that made it miraculous rather than fortunate. To accept my doubts would require him to reinterpret the defining moment of his life, to acknowledge that he had simply been lucky rather than blessed. That was a cognitive burden he could not bear. I am glad you survived, I said honestly. If faith in the Emperor's intervention gives your life meaning, if it makes your service feel purposeful, then perhaps that faith is worth maintaining regardless of whether it reflects reality. It is not about worth, Davian insisted. It is about truth. The Emperor protects. That is not opinion or interpretation. That is fundamental truth, as real as gravity or the existence of the warp. They only reveal that chaos has touched you, has planted seeds of uncertainty designed to corrupt you from within. There it was, the ultimate defense against doubt. Any questioning must be corruption. Any uncertainty must be chaos influence. Any rational examination of evidence must be demonic whisper. The theology immunized itself against criticism by declaring that criticism itself was proof of supernatural evil rather than honest observation. Then perhaps I am corrupted, I said tiredly. Perhaps chaos has indeed touched me, and these doubts are not my own but implanted by dark powers seeking to undermine the Imperium through its defenders. If that is what you believe, then you were right to arrest me. Right to call for inquisitorial investigation. I will submit to whatever examination they deem necessary. Davian looked at me with something approaching relief, as if my acknowledgement of possible corruption was actually comforting compared to the alternative of rational doubt. The Inquisitor will determine the truth. If you are corrupted, he will either cleanse you or grant you the Emperor's mercy. If you are not, if this is simply spiritual crisis following trauma, then counseling and penance will restore your faith. Either way, the chapter will endure. And if the examination reveals I am not corrupted, that my doubts are simply honest questions based on observation, I asked. What then, Davian? Will you accept that faithful servants can doubt without being tainted? Or will you continue to insist that any questioning must be supernatural influence? He had no answer to that, because the framework of his faith provided no space for righteous doubt. In his worldview, you either believed or you were corrupted. There was no third option, no possibility of maintaining service while acknowledging uncertainty. Go to your quarters, he said finally, avoiding the question. The Inquisitor will arrive within the hour. Prepare yourself for examination. And Castellan, for what it is worth, I pray the Emperor will restore your faith. I pray he will show you the error in your doubts and return you to certainty. Because I cannot imagine serving under any other commander, and I do not wish to lose you to heresy or despair. The sentiment was genuine, and it touched me despite everything. Thank you, brother. Whatever comes, know that my doubt was never meant to harm the chapter or undermine its mission. I simply could not continue serving while maintaining comfortable lies. Perhaps that makes me weak, perhaps it makes me corrupted, or perhaps it simply makes me human. I walked to my quarters under guard, brothers I had led for decades now watching me with expressions mixing concern, confusion, and suspicion. The door sealed behind me with a pneumatic hiss, and I found myself alone for the first time since the crisis began. Alone with my thoughts, my doubts, my evidence and arguments, and the crushing weight of knowledge that had destroyed my certainty. I knelt before the aquila carved into my chamber wall, that twin-headed eagle that symbolized the Emperor's eternal vigilance. And I tried to pray, not because I believed anyone was listening, but because the familiar ritual provided some structure to my spiraling thoughts. "My lord," I began, and the words felt like poison. "If you hear me, if you watch over us despite all evidence suggesting otherwise, I need guidance. I need to know whether my service still matters, whether maintaining the faith serves your purposes or simply perpetuates humanity's exploitation. I could not finish. The prayer died in my throat, choked by the knowledge that no answer would come, that the silence was not testing but simple absence. I was praying to a corpse on a throne, to a being that had not spoken or moved in 10,000 years, asking for guidance from someone who could not provide it. The door opened without warning. Brother Chaplain Castellan entered, his skull-faced helm removed, his scarred face grave with spiritual concern. Behind him came a figure in the black armor of the Inquisition, his face hidden behind an ornate mask bearing the seal of the Ordo Hereticus. "Castellan Hestin," Castellan said formally. "Inquisitor Voke wishes to speak with you regarding the concerns I have raised about your spiritual condition. You will answer his questions honestly and completely. The Emperor's judgment is upon you." The Inquisitor moved forward with measured steps, his masked face unreadable, his presence somehow both threatening and scholarly. When he spoke, His voice was cultured, educated, carrying none of the fanatical fervor I had expected. Castellan Hestin. I am Inquisitor Amadeus Voke of the Ordo Hereticus. I have reviewed Brother Chaplain Castien's report regarding your suspected crisis of faith following the Sanctum's Fall engagement. I have also accessed the communication archives detailing that engagement and the Imperial response to it. Before we begin formal examination, I wish to speak with you candidly, commander to commander, about what you have experienced. I stood, facing him directly despite the power disparity between us. He could order my execution with a word, could subject me to psychic interrogation that would tear my mind apart, searching for chaos taint. But I would face him honestly, would speak truth regardless of consequences. Then let us speak candidly, Inquisitor. What do you wish to know? He gestured for Castien to leave, and surprisingly, the chaplain complied, though reluctance was clear in every movement. When we were alone, Voke removed his mask, revealing a face perhaps 2 centuries old, marked with old scars and the weight of long service. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unexpectedly sympathetic. I wish to know, he said quietly, whether your doubts stem from chaos, corruption, or from honest observation of how the Imperium functions. Because I have read the Sanctum's Fall records, Castellan. I have seen the distress calls ignored, the reinforcement requests denied, the casual dismissal of 17 billion lives. And I must tell you, if I had experienced what you experienced, I would have questions too. The admission shocked me into momentary silence. An inquisitor acknowledging that doubt might be justified, that questioning might be rational rather than corrupted. Then you understand, I said carefully. You see why I cannot simply pray away the evidence, cannot force myself back into faith when everything I have witnessed suggests that faith is built on foundations of propaganda rather than reality. I understand completely, Voke replied. I have served the Inquisition for 237 years. I have seen worlds abandoned, populations sacrificed, strategic decisions made that consigned billions to death because saving them was not cost-effective. I have watched faithful populations pray to an emperor who does not answer, who perhaps cannot answer, who may not even be aware they exist. Yes, Castellan, I understand your doubts intimately. Because I share them, I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. An inquisitor, a defender of the imperial faith, admitting his own doubts, acknowledging the same crisis of faith that had destroyed my certainty. Then how, I demanded, how do you continue serving? How do you maintain the faith, enforce the orthodoxy, when you know it is built on lies? Because the lie is necessary, Voke said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. The Imperium is dying, Castellan, slowly, inevitably, crushed beneath the weight of its own vastness and the endless assault of Xenos and Chaos forces. Without faith in the Emperor, without the unifying theology that binds 1,000,000 worlds together, it would fragment and die within decades. The faith is not true in the way believers imagine, but it is necessary in ways they cannot comprehend. So, we lie to them, I said bitterly. We tell them their prayers are heard, their sacrifices matter, their faith is rewarded. We use their devotion as a tool to extract maximum service, while knowing they are simply resources being expended by administrators following pragmatic calculations. Yes, Voke agreed simply. We do, and that knowledge should weigh on you every day of your service. The moment you become comfortable with the necessary lies, the moment you stop feeling guilty about the exploitation, that is when you become simply another tyrant, rather than a reluctant guardian. Your doubt, your discomfort, your inability to easily dismiss the human cost of strategic necessity. These are features, not bugs. They keep you human. They prevent you from becoming a monster. But I cannot lead while doubting, I protested. I cannot stand before my brothers and speak words I do not believe. Every invocation of the Emperor's will feels like participating in their exploitation. Then you are experiencing what every honest leader in the Imperium eventually experiences, Voke said. The burden of knowing truth while maintaining necessary fictions. Some handle it better than others. Some compartmentalize, believing sincerely in moments of prayer while acknowledging reality in moments of command. Others, like yourself, find the cognitive dissonance unbearable and seek either death or some form of resolution. And which do you recommend? I asked, genuinely wanting guidance from someone who understood the impossible position I occupied. Neither, Voke replied. I recommend you accept the dissonance, carry it as the burden of leadership it truly is. You will never again have the comfortable certainty you once possessed. You will always feel the weight of necessary lies, will always struggle with the exploitation inherent in maintaining imperial faith. But you will also continue to save lives, to stand between humanity and annihilation, to make the hard choices that preserve civilization even at terrible cost. That is enough. It has to be enough. His words echoed what Lucian had told me, what Thalric had suggested, what my own reason had been slowly accepting. There was no resolution, no comfortable answer, only the choice to serve despite doubt, to maintain necessary lies while never excusing them, to accept complicity while never becoming comfortable with it. And the chapter? I asked. Brother Sergeant Davian, Brother Chaplain Castian. They will never accept leadership that acknowledges doubt. They need absolute faith, need certainty that we serve divine will rather than mortal pragmatism. Then give them that certainty, Voke said. Not through your own belief, but through your performance of belief. Lead prayers, as you always have. Invoke the Emperor's protection as doctrine demands. Maintain every ritual and tradition. Your brothers do not need your internal conviction. They need your external performance of conviction. Can you provide that? It was a question that cut to the heart of everything. Could I live that lie? Could I speak words I did not believe? Perform rituals I considered empty? Maintain a facade of faith while dying, inside from the weight of truth? It would be torture, would require constant vigilance against allowing my doubt to show, would mean living every moment with the knowledge that I was complicit in exploitation. But the alternative was watching the chapter fragment, was allowing faithful leadership that would simply perpetuate the cycle without even acknowledging its cost, was abandoning my brothers to comfortable lies without anyone carrying the burden of truth. I can try, I said finally. I cannot promise I will succeed. I cannot guarantee that my doubt will not eventually show through the performance. But I can try to maintain the necessary fictions while carrying the weight of truth, can attempt to lead while acknowledging privately what I must deny publicly. That is all any of us can do, Voke said gently. Now, for the official record, I must conduct a psychic examination to ensure you are not tainted by chaos. My assessment will determine whether you return to command or face charges of heresy. Do you consent to this examination? I do, I replied, though fear coiled in my stomach. What if the examination revealed my doubts as corruption? What if honest questioning registered as chaos taint in whatever psychic scan he performed? Voke's eyes began to glow with psychic energy, his consciousness reaching out to touch mine. I felt his presence in my thoughts, sorting through memories and emotions with practiced efficiency. He lingered on Sanctum's fall, on the communication archives, on my crisis of faith and the conclusions I had drawn. For long minutes, I was laid bare before him, every doubt and question exposed to his psychic scrutiny. When he withdrew, his face was thoughtful rather than condemning. Your doubt is clean, he pronounced. No chaos taint, no demon whispers, no corruption of any kind. Simply honest questions arising from traumatic experience and rational observation. The Emperor's judgment is that you remain fit for command. though I recommend continued spiritual counseling to help you process what you have experienced. Relief flooded through me so intensely I nearly staggered, not corrupted, not heretical, simply doubting, and that doubt deemed acceptable by the Inquisition itself. "Thank you, Inquisitor," I managed. "Do not thank me yet," Voke warned. "The difficult part comes now. You must convince Brother Sergeant Davian and Brother Chaplain Castellan that you have overcome your crisis, that whatever doubts you harbored have been resolved through examination and reflection. They must believe you are restored to certainty, even as you carry that doubt internally. Can you perform that deception convincingly?" It was the question I had been avoiding. Could I lie to brothers I loved? Could I pretend to faith I did not possess? Could I maintain that facade day after day, year after year, perhaps for centuries? "I will do what is necessary," I said, and heard in my voice the death of something precious. The death of innocence, perhaps, or the death of honesty, or simply the death of the comfortable certainty that had sustained me for 300 years. Voke summoned Castellan and Davian back to my chambers. They entered with expressions mixing hope and concern, clearly wondering what the Inquisitor's examination had revealed. "I have completed my psychic assessment of Castellan Hestin," Voke announced formally. "He is free of chaos taint, free of corruption, free of any supernatural influence. His doubts stem from the trauma of the Sanctum's Fall engagement, a crisis of confidence following devastating losses. However, through examination and spiritual counseling, I believe he has regained his certainty and is fit to resume command of the Crimson Guard chapter." Davian's face broke into a genuine smile of relief. "Thank the Emperor. I knew you would find your way back, Castellan. I knew your faith was too strong to be permanently shaken." I forced myself to smile, to project the certainty Voke had claimed I possessed. The Inquisitor is correct. I allowed my grief over our losses to manifest as doubt about the Emperor's plan. But I understand now that his ways are beyond our comprehension, that our suffering serves purposes we cannot see. I am ready to resume my duties and lead the chapter with renewed devotion. The words tasted like ashes, felt like betrayal of everything I had learned. But Davian accepted them eagerly, his relief visible in every feature. Castellan looked more skeptical, but nodded acceptance of the Inquisitor's judgment. "I am glad to hear it, Castellan," Castellan said carefully, "though I hope you will permit me to continue providing spiritual guidance as you process what occurred. Crisis of faith, even when resolved, leaves scars that require tending." "Of course, Brother Chaplain," I agreed, knowing that Castellan would be watching me closely, looking for any sign that my doubt had not truly been resolved. I would have to be careful, would have to perform faith so convincingly that even he believed it genuine. After they departed, after Voke delivered his formal report clearing me of corruption charges, after I was officially restored to command and the chapter arrest was lifted, I stood alone in my chambers and felt the weight of what I had agreed to. A lifetime, potentially centuries, of maintaining a lie, of speaking prayers I did not believe, of invoking an emperor I knew did not hear us, of leading brothers into war while knowing their faith was exploitation, their devotion was being used as a tool to extract maximum sacrifice. But I would do it, because the alternative was worse. Because without someone carrying the burden of truth, the chapter would simply continue the cycle without even acknowledging its cost. Because perhaps there was purpose in serving despite doubt, in protecting humanity even while knowing that protection was not divinely mandated, but simply human choice. I was Castellan Valdor Hestin of the Crimson Guard. I had been faithful, and faith had been destroyed by evidence. Now, I would be something more complicated, neither truly believing nor completely abandoning service, maintaining necessary lies while carrying the weight of truth, serving not because the Emperor commanded it, but because humanity needed defenders, regardless of whether any god watched over them. It was not the answer I had wanted, but perhaps it was the only honest answer available. And if honesty required living with unbearable tension, with constant dissonance between public performance and private knowledge, then that was the price of leadership in an empire built on exploitation disguised as divine will. The prayers I would lead tomorrow would taste like poison, but I would speak them anyway, because that was what necessary lies required, and I had chosen, however reluctantly, to bear that burden. So I learned the truth that inquisitors know, that chapter masters understand, that perhaps the Primarchs realized too late. The Emperor does not remember us because he never knew us. We are atoms in his calculation, cells in a body too vast to perceive its own components. He saved humanity not from love, but cosmic necessity. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it has to be. We still fight. We still protect the innocent. We still stand against the darkness. We do it because humanity deserves protection, even if its God has forgotten it exists. I am Castellan Valdor Hestin. I have no blessing, no divine purpose, no certainty of reward. I have only the choice to act, to serve, to sacrifice, not for a God who looks away. In the grim darkness of the far future, we are all forgotten by the Emperor. But we do not have to forget each other.